Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to show you how to create a caustic effect in Blender. I'm going to need a caustic effect to create it on Waterboy's surface of his skin. So let's go ahead and create a plane. This is going to serve as a visual presentation of how our caustic will look like, and then later on, we're going to apply that same texture on a light. Okay, so with the plane selected, let's go ahead and create a brand new material. I'm going to go and call it Caustic Matte. And let's go to our shader editor. Alright, and if you don't see your shader, just press dot on your numpad and you should be able to zoom into your shader there. Now let's go ahead and create a Voronoi texture. Shift A, and let's go and type in Voronoi texture. And we have to preview how the Voronoi texture look like. So let's go ahead and set this to material preview right here. Okay. So we are looking at our plane right here as we're doing this. Control Shift click on your Voronoi texture so we could view how it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and just isolate this, Shift H. So I'm only looking at this here. And we could go ahead and crank up the scale a little bit. You could see, looks very nice. It looks almost like caustic already, but there's a lot more we could do to make this better. Let's go ahead and add a color ramp. And plug that in there. So the Voronoi texture distance is connected to the effect of the color ramp. Control Shift click on your color ramp so we're able to see how it looks like with the Voronoi texture. Okay, so now we have to go ahead and set the F from F1 to distance to edge for the Voronoi texture. Control Shift click here onto your color ramp so you're able to view it. And then we could go ahead and drag our slider to the left, our white one. We could play around with the slider here. If you move the slider, the black slider to the right, you see the outline of the black is getting thicker. And if you adjust the slider to the left for the white one, you could see that it gets a little flatter. You see more of the white there, which is exactly what we need. All right, so maybe something like that. And we could mess around with the scale if we need to. Maybe I want it a little bit large. And we're going to create another set of these with the Voronoi texture and the color ramp together. We're going to create another set of that, and we're going to make it smaller. Control Shift click on your Voronoi texture here, and then we could go ahead and crank up the scale for that. And we're going to combine these two together with a mix color node. Shift A and type in mix color. Could plug this in. Plug in the color ramp for this onto the B, and then plug in the color ramp of this to A, and then let's go and set the mix to multiply, and then you could set the factor to a higher value so you could see more of your second Voronoi here that you have added. I don't want this to be as strong as the first one, so maybe something like this would be fine. Yeah, something like that. I could mess around with it later if I need to. Maybe I could strengthen it later if I need to, but I think for now I want it a little bit more subtle than the first Voronoi. And I do want it to be not that small, maybe something like this. Alright, and another thing to make this a little better, make it more believable, we could add another Voronoi texture. Control Shift click on it so we could preview how it looks like. Alright, so something like that, which we're going to combine this type of Voronoi, a little bit smooth it out. We're going to combine it with the other Voronoi texture that we have created. Let's go ahead and create another mix color. And then we're going to plug in the mix color node that we already have with the mix color node that we have with the Voronoi, the new one. So let's go and plug this in over here and plug this in over here. And then go ahead and set this to multiply. And of course, it's a rainbow color. We need to set it to a different color. You have to set a color ramp for that. So we could choose later on what color we want for it. There you go. You can mess around with the color ramp as needed. And set it to multiply, set the factor high. And yeah, we can go ahead and mess around with that. Control Shift click on here, and it's too hard, and what we could do is we could set this from 40 and then set this to smooth F1 There you go. So we got something nice like that. You could go ahead and mess around with this and then mess around with the scale. And if it's too smooth, you could bring down the smoothing. And then Control Shift click here so we could see how it all looks like combined. So yeah, something like that would be great. Now, I'm happy with this texture. How do we put this in on the light? Because we want the light to have this type of texture that will illuminate the surface of our water, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a spotlight. You can go ahead and Shift A, and let's go ahead and add a spotlight here. Go ahead and bring that up. All right, and I could go and scale it down slightly, bring it down. There you go. Go. All right, and then with that spotlight, this is very important in order for this to work. You need to make sure that in order for this to work, you have to go and make sure that you are on render engine cycles, all right? Because if you don't have it on cycles, you're not going to see this very important part where you select the light and then you're going to see use nodes. So with your light selected, click on use nodes and you're going to be able to see that there's an emission node connected to the light output for the light here that you have selected. We're going to copy and paste the textures, the nodes that we have created for our caustic. We're going to go ahead and select all of the nodes that we have done from the Voronoi texture up to the multiply here. You don't have to include the principal BSDF. You don't have to include the material output, just these right here. So go ahead and select all of those. Control C. And then let's go to our light. And then we have to go ahead and Control V. And then we're going to go ahead and plug in the first node there and plug it onto the color right there. And let's see what we have so far if we go ahead and do a little render test. Okay. We have to go ahead and select this one and let's just add a plain material for this. I'm going to go and remove that and just create a plain material. All right. And then with our light here selected, we have to make sure the emission for our light is cranked up to a higher value. You could set it to 15. And right now, we don't really see anything, right? We need to make sure that we have our power up high. So we could set it to maybe 50. And we still don't see it. That's because we need to make sure that our Voronoi textures here have a texture coordinate. So with our Voronoi texture selected, you could go ahead and Control T to bring the texture coordinate and the mapping. If you press Control T and this doesn't pop up as you select the Voronoi texture node, you need to make sure that on the edit preferences that you have node wrangler turned on, right? All right, so Control T while you have this selected, and then you're going to have your texture coordinate and mapping. And then you need to make sure that this other Voronoi texture is also connected to that. And then we need to set the normal to vector. All right, with that, you could see now what's happening. We could see the caustic. Now, we could go ahead and crank up the power even more. I'm going to set this to maybe 100. Here you go. You can see it way much better. We could also mess around with our scale here. We're going to say I could crank this up. I could also crank up this one. All right, so it depends on how you want, what you want for this. And another thing is you could play around with the color ramp that's connected to the Voronoi texture. So I know that this here is going to be for my water boy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be changing the black here. I'm going to go ahead and set it right here, and the white's going to be here. And then for this color, I'm going to set it to maybe a bluish color. And yeah, so maybe I'm going to set the color to my water boy's color, something like that. And then over here, I'm going to switch this. White is going to be here. And then this one, I'm going to set it to, once again, maybe a watery color like that. Okay, and yeah, so that's good. You could also crank up the power if you need it to be a little bit more intense. So maybe if I set this to 500, you could see more intense lighting there as you need it. And maybe it's a little too thick, the outline. I could go and make this a little closer to each other. And also here for the color ramp, much closer to each other like that. Really depends how you want it. And I think I'm going to go back to how I combine my Voronoi texture. And I'm going to set this to 1 instead, so I could see more of my Voronoi texture that's connected to this. And maybe a good, there you go. And maybe I could set it to a darker color. And maybe something like that. Yeah, like that. All right, so I am quite happy with that. I'm going to go and turn it off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I already have a light for my water boy. So if I go ahead and Alt H and show everything, I have this light right here that is already illuminating water boy's surface from this side. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And before I delete it, I'm going to go ahead and just copy my nodes here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all these nodes, Control C. And then I'm going to go set it to the light where I want it to go, which is this one right here that's really pointing at water boy. And I'm going to go and use nodes, Control V, and then plug that in right here onto the emission. And this only works with spotlight. So right now I have this at area light. So I'm just going to set it to spot. And I'm going to copy the settings that I have here. This one I have at 500. I think that might be a little too much for my water boy, so I think I'm going to set it to a 300 instead. Okay, and yeah, I'm going to go ahead and delete this light right here. Go back to this light, and I also have the emission strength here for this light that I have. I'm going to set it to 15. And let me see what I have so far with this. If I go ahead and do a little render test. All right, it's a little too much. It's a little too much. I could go ahead and play around with the power. So I'm going to set this to maybe 50. All right. Now I am really liking how this is look like on the shirt, but I think it's a little too thick, the outline for the Caustics. So I'm going to go back and just kind of mess around with the color ramp. I'm going to go ahead and make it thinner. So the closer these sliders are together, the thinner it'll be. So you can see that. And also here, I'm going to make it just thinner. All right, so much better. Much better. And then I think it's too enhanced, so I'm going to bring down the power. So maybe I could set this to 40. All right, something like that. Maybe a little bit more down. And let's say you want to kind of smooth out the Caustics. You could go to the radius for your light. So let me show you what I mean. So let's say that I have this, let me set it to a higher value. So I have it 50. And let's say you want the edges of the caustic to be just smoother, like you just smudge it. You could crank up the values. If I set it the radius to 0.1, you could see it just kind of smoothens it. If you don't want to too much of a high value, if I set it to 0.001 and then maybe 0.02, all right, you can see that it's definitely smoothed out. And I'm gonna go and set it to 0.01, and then the power I'm gonna set it to 20. Maybe a little too much. I'm gonna set it to 10. Now I think the entire scene is a little too dark. I could go over to my cycles to here, which is the render options here, and then I'm going to go to my color management. Click here, and I could set the exposure to maybe 0.1. Let's see, to 1. A little too much. Maybe 0.4. All right. Alright guys, so that's how you create caustics. And if you guys want to still mess around with the value, play around, tinker around with this, play around with the scale for your Voronoi texture. So an artist's job is never over, remember that. And you guys go ahead and take your time, and I hope you guys learn a lot from this. I'll see you guys in the next Victory 3D video.